All right. So roll 214, so that's political science. So that's the next book. Okay. Chapter 2, Political Behavior is Human Behavior. Chapter outline 2.1, What goals should we seek in politics? 2, Why do humans make the political choices that they do? 3, Human behavior is partially predictable. 4, The importance of context for political decisions. Introduction. Tensions are growing in the South China Sea. China, seeking to expand its sphere of influence, is building up its military capacity and presence. Taiwan considers itself an independent country. China considers Taiwan a breakaway Chinese province. The United States watches warily. It has been a dominant military and economic power in the region since World War II. It is a major trade partner with China and has a special relationship with Taiwan. Will conflict lead to war, or can peaceful relations prevail? I'm kind of hungry. Fuck. Okay. Introduction. Tensions are growing. Oh, sorry, I just read that. The grandest conflicts in its international relations are ultimately based on the behavior of individual humans. Political leaders, the citizens who support or oppose them, the decisions they make, and the actions they take. To understand politics, to understand who is doing what, when, and how, it is necessary to understand humans. Understanding humans requires more than simply observing how they behave. However, it is also useful to attempt to discern their moral aspirations, to learn what they believe to be their higher goals. In this view, however, China, Taiwan, and the United States choose to act. Their actions will be about more than merely defending their material interests. These countries' leaders are also pursuing their ideas of how the world should be structured, of what principles they espouse, and of what they believe political rules and goals really should be. This chapter will consider matters both normative and empirical, both philosophical and practical. Politics involves both lofty dreams and down and dirty actions. First, the chapter considers aspirations and then turns to behavior. 2.1, What goals should we seek in politics? Learning outcomes. By the end of this section, you will be able to identify 4 major questions in political philosophy, define key terms in political philosophy, list major conceptions of social justice, distinguish between political philosophies in principle and their application in practice. Humans seek a wide variety of goals through political action. Many of these goals are based on self-interest, includes the pursuit of power. But is pursuing self-interest the highest and best goal for political action? Or is it possible to identify goals that go beyond? Give me more than of what I want. Efforts to research these goals take us into the realm of normative political theory. Political philosophy, which is introduced in Chapter 1, What is Politics and What is Political Science, it is not possible to demonstrate empirically what people should seek. Normative political theory relies on logic and persuasion. Normative political theorists are interested in describing who people are and what they do, and more concerned with who people could be and what they should do. The distinction between how the world is and how it should be is not always clear. For the big questions posed below, some have argued that answers exist and that it is a human task to find them. Others contend that humans create the answers to our biggest questions. A non-political analogy is the question, does mathematics exist independently of human minds so that humans discover it, or do humans actually create it themselves? This question cannot be answered by evidence. There is no proof regarding the origin of mathematical proofs, so advocates of each position appeal to our moral intuitions and our ability to reason. What are human rights? Which rights should be called human rights? Is a core question in political theory. Human rights can be thought of in 3 ways. One is that human rights exist, although unobservable. They are real, just as gravity is real. It may not be possible to know their source, but various philosophers have contended that they exist through God, nature, or human reason. From this perspective, people do not create human rights, nor must they earn them. Human rights are inalienable. They cannot be denied, taken away, or transferable to anyone else. The United Nations takes this position, describing human rights as rights we have simply because we exist as human beings. They are not granted by any state. These universal rights are inherent to us all, regardless of nationality, sex, national or ethnic character, color, religion, language, or any other status. They range from the most fundamental, the right to life, to those that make life worth living, such as the rights to food, education, work, health, and liberty. Alternatively, human rights can be seen as a human invention, a social construction, or a creation. In this view, unlike gravity, which exerts its force whether it or not humans recognize it, political action is necessary to create and protect human rights. The basis for this view comes from observing the world around us. If you can look around, you will see poverty, homelessness, discrimination, and violence. Billions of individuals can attest to the fact that they do not themselves have access to the human rights that are often called inalienable. From this perspective, human rights are created through political action. They are what people define them to be. Here's yet a third possibility. The human rights are inherent, but too often ignored. Human rights are not created, but discovered. One of the tasks of political theory is to discern what these rights are, and one of the obligations of political actors is to bring these rights into practice. What countries have often failed to protect these rights reveals the flaws of political action, not the absence of the rights themselves. Human rights are so important to politics that this book examines them in multiple places. Chapter 4 focuses on civil liberties, freedoms of conscience, worship, and speech, as well as the right to privacy, among others. Civil liberties involve the freedoms that humans have to live their lives according to their own directions and purposes, without governmental interference. Chapter 7, Civil Rights, examines civil rights, another form of human rights that are most often considered rights that are affirmed to specific groups that had previously been denied their rights, such as, for example, when African Americans in the United States were guaranteed the right to vote through the 15th Amendment to the United States Constitution, and when the 19th Amendment extended voting rights to women. Consideration of human rights is central to international law, organizations, and treaties, so the book again turns to these rights in Chapter 15, International Law and International Organizations. The United Nations has been a leading voice advocating for human rights, especially through its Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Although many other national and international organizations have also made the definition and promotion of human rights central to their activities, what is social justice? As with human rights, it is worth asking whether such a thing as social justice actually exists, or whether, in the words of philosopher Friedrich Hayek, social justice is just a mirage. Rather than engaging in the debate as to whether social justice is a human invention or an eternal verity, this chapter instead explores the most important, often competing, definitions of social justice that have been proposed. There are as many different definitions of social justice as there are differing conceptions of justice itself. The common element across the various perspectives is that social justice is achieved when the distribution of opportunities, resources, and rights is equitable, or in simpler terms, fair. A brief general outline of some of the most prominent conceptions of social justice in the Western tradition is helpful before turning to critiques and alternative views. Utilitarianism. Utilitarianism is the belief that there is one measure of worth in society, utility, or what one might call happiness or well-being. In the utilitarian view, the goal of society is to maximize human happiness and human welfare. This is sometimes summarized as calling for the greatest happiness for the greatest number, but that description is not quite complete. Utilitarians also want to avoid unhappiness if possible. What matters is net happiness, that is, the sum of all happiness minus the sum of all unhappiness. So increasing happiness and reducing unhappiness are both valuable social goals. A just society maximizes human happiness. This implies that a good government is one that chooses policies that maximize utility. A central challenge to utilitarianism is how to measure human happiness. Like power, happiness cannot be measured directly. Imagine that a country says Kenya is deciding whether to create a new national park with a diverse ecosystem and magnificent vistas, preserving these in perpetuity. Creating this park will also prevent economic development on those lands and, unfortunately, displace those who live there. Will creating the park increase net human happiness? Depending on how the calculations are done, the answer could be either yes or no, so it's not always possible to know which answer is correct. Utilitarianism has had a profound impact on public policies around the world. Governments use cost-benefit analysis, which is based on utilitarian principles, to analyze their policies and policy proposals. At the same time, implies cost-benefit analysis tries to identify all the various costs and benefits of a policy. If total benefits exceed total costs, the policy is seen as enhancing utility and so should be adopted. Libertarianism. Libertarianism rejects the idea that maximizing net happiness produces a just society. Libertarians claim that individual rights should not be violated, even if doing so increases net social utility. Social justice is, in the eyes of libertarians, results when individual liberties are most fully protected from the state and from others. Here is a simple example. If Robin Hood steals the belongings of one rich person and gives them to the poor, society as a whole may be happier because those who receive the goods are now much happier, and only one rich person is now unhappy. In its simplest form, utilitarianism might approve of Robin Hoods to the extent that their actions increase net happiness. Libertarians reject this, arguing that the rights of the rich person were violated, and that this is impermissible even if it makes society in general happier. Our instant reaction might be that, of course, thievery is wrong. A libertarian would respond that almost any action by governments or individuals that deprives us of our liberty or property is thievery. Taxes? The government is stealing my money. Environmental regulations? The government is robbing me of my rights to use my property as I wish. Speed limits and gun regulations? The government is depriving me of my liberty to drive as I wish or use guns as I please, so long as my driving or gun use does not directly threaten others. As a result, libertarians claim that social justice is created through a political system that maximizes individual liberty and protects individual rights, with a government dedicated to securing those goals with minimal rules at minimal cost. A libertarian country would require military and police forces because these are necessary to protect rights and preserve order, and citizens must be taxed to pay for these protections. According to the most ardent libertarians, virtually all other government functions are illegitimate if they require taxes to pay for them because taxes are seen as theft. Rather than the government providing these goods and services, individuals should have the freedom to purchase them through the open market. Marxism. From each according to his abilities, to each according to his needs. This is the essence of the social justice views of Marxism, an ideology associated with the political and economic theories of Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels. Although these theories are wide-ranging and complex, the core element of Marxism that relates to social justice concerns how material resources should be produced and distributed. According to Marxists, a society is just when both economic and labor contributions and needed resources are distributed properly, without discrimination. In his writings, Marx explicitly rejected capitalism. Capitalism is an economic system in which the means of production are privately owned, and individuals are assumed to be motivated primarily by acquisitiveness. The production of goods and services is based on supply and demand, with the vast majority of the population selling their labor to the capitalists in return for wages. Marx considered capitalism to be fundamentally coercive and unjust, with the working class exploited. Under capitalism, government and politics serve only the interests of the capitalists, as the state is nothing more Under capitalism, government and politics serve only the interests of the capitalists, as the state is nothing more than a machine for the oppression of one class by another. According to Marx, political systems do not create economic systems. Instead, the economic structure of society is the real foundation on which rise moral, legal, and political superstructures. And the modern state, no matter what its form, is essentially a capitalist machine. The creation of a just society, according to Marx, thus calls for a radical reordering of society, a revolution. Class distinctions, and hence the conflict between workers and capitalists, must be eliminated. In a just society, government would no longer be needed, as the only real purpose of government is to protect the interests of the capitalists. In such a society, communism, in which all people share equally in the creation and allocation of goods, and within which all people are truly free, because they are no longer subject to class repression would prevail. Today, there are only 5 countries, China, Cuba, Laos, North Korea, and Vietnam, that label themselves as communist. In none of these countries do all residents share good equally, as political elites ultimately control the allocation of resources. Yet the principles that motivate advocates of Marxism have found a profound impact on countries around the world, especially through well-established political parties in many countries, as well as prominent advocates for such as Senator Bernie Sanders in the United States. Rawls's theory of justice. One of the most influential political philosophers of the 20th century was John Rawls, who offered a comprehensive theory of justice. To understand Rawls's ideas, imagine that you could design the allocation of rights and resources for all the citizens of the world, and that you would then be placed in this world. However, while designing this world, you would not know who would actually be in the world you created. In designing it, you would be operating from behind a veil of ignorance. What kind of world would the rational person create? Not one with great poverty or other large inequalities, because it is possible that the designer could be poor or the victim of those inequalities. As a result, any rational person would design a world using 2 basic principles. First, not knowing who you would be in this world, you would give everyone the same basic liberties and rights. Second, as a rational person, you would distribute resources so that inequalities wouldn't be allowed only to the extent that they would benefit the least well off. For example, an inventor could earn a higher than average income if the invention served to improve the lives of those with less income. These ideas give us a tool to evaluate the policies and practices of countries. Would a just society allow racial or ethnic discrimination? No, because the person designing the society from behind the veil of ignorance would not know which racial or ethnic group they would be once placed in the world. As a result, the national designer would ensure that no discrimination existed. Rawls's theory of justice implies that anyone acting rationally behind the veil of ignorance would create a just world. Rawls makes a logical case for adopting his principles, and they are closely related to the Golden Rule, elements of which have been a common feature of the world's religion since antiquity. African Americans and social justice. Countless African Americans devoted their lives to advancing the cause of social justice, but the ideas of activism and for African Americans, Booker T. Washington, Ida Wells, W.E.B. Du Bois, Martin Luther King Jr., merit special attention regarding social justice. Anyone thinking and writing about social justice will be influenced by their own specific experiences, and these 4 individuals came of age in a country that proclaimed a view of the good society that was denied to them because of their race. These thinkers were also activists. They were less concerned with how to define social justice than with how to obtain it. In their focus on social justice, these individuals recognized that institutional reform was essential, as justice could not prevail unless the branch of government supported it. Booker T. Washington, who was born into enslavement but advanced to become perhaps the most politically influent African American of his period, called for Black empowerment through education and entrepreneurship. In Washington's eyes, political activity alone cannot make a man free. He must have property, industry, skill, economy, intelligence, and character. W.E.B. Du Bois, an early leader in the struggle for racial equality in the United States, advocated for a social justice that would recognize universal human rights while also incorporating a special concern for those groups who had been oppressed and marginalized. As one of the founders of the NAACP, Du Bois conducted path-breaking research on Black communities and wrote The Study of the Negro Problem, Souls of Black Folks, Black Reconstruction in America, and many other books. He insisted that full civil rights and political representation for African Americans were preconditions of justice. Ida Wells was also born into enslavement. As a freed adult, she was a journalist and an advocate for rights for African Americans and women, as she helped establish the NAACP as well as other organizations supporting women's rights. She was best known for documenting the lynching of African Americans and the use of lynching as a tool of racial oppression, and for inspiring the anti-lynching movement. One of her many legacies is the Ida B. Wells Society for Investigative Reporting, which encourages journalists to expose governmental injustices and to defend the vulnerable. Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. was a racial advocate for social justice. He said of the uprisings in the late 1960s, "The Black Revolution is much more than a struggle for the rights of Negroes. It is forcing America to face all its interrelated flaws: racism, poverty, militarism, and materialism. It is exposing evils that are rooted deeply in the whole structure of our society. It reveals systemic rather than superficial flaws, and suggests that radical reconstruction of society itself is the real issue to be faced. Social justice required societies to simultaneously address all their social ills, to actively work to end all forms of discrimination. Still, King was hopeful that we will be able to achieve the ideal, the goal of the new age, the age of social justice. Gandhi's philosophy. Influential political ethicist Mahatma Gandhi led the nonviolent struggle in India against British rule. Although he never wrote explicitly about social justice, his writings, a mixture of political science, spirituality, religion, and ethics, frame his understanding of what a just society would look like. Like Western political philosophers, Gandhi emphasizes the dignity of the individual and a respect for human rights. Unlike most Western writers, however, Gandhi's vision focused not only on rights, but also on duties. Civilization is that mode of conduct that points out to man the path of duty. Similar to Marx, Gandhi called for resources to be allocated so that each man shall have the withdrawal or wherewithal to supply his needs and no more. Seeing the state as a source of violence against its people, he favored a minimalist government, with the long-term goal of harmonious local rule. But political freedom would mean little without social and economic freedom. For Gandhi, a just society would arise not through an armed revolution, but only through a nonviolent one. Oh, I'm hungry. Hold on, I'm going to pause for a sec.
Layers of
All right, I'm back.
And feel. Keep it quilted, keeps a mood.
Non-Western and feminist critiques.
And puts your comfort
The astute reader will note that
above
these
all
conceptions of social justice have all been proposed by men
Keep it
from Europe
quilted
and the
because
United
best
States.
parts of your life deserve the best. So don't
They
settle for
seek to make
anything
universal
less.
claims applicable
Keep it
to all
quilted
people
with Quilted Northern.
in all places and all times. These ideas have had broad, deep, and lasting impacts on politics around the world. Principles of utilitarianism and libertarianism have become embedded in the constitutions and the policies of virtually every country. Marxism has influenced revolutions in Africa, Asia, and Latin America, although not as influential worldwide. The Rawlsian conception of justice has had a broad impact on policy in the United States, including policies addressing racism and economic inequality. Western theories of social justice generally begin with the individual. So, for example, social justice is obtained when individual happiness or personal liberty is maximized. These Western and male conceptions of social justice hardly exhaust the possibilities. Maximizing happiness on liberty are not the only goals of social justice, and non-Western voices have been marginalized or ignored. Westerners have been accused of exporting to Africa their notions of social justice that were out of tune with the local context, based on an individualized view of justice. True social justice, in contrast to Western philosophy, would recognize the primacy of the community over the individual, emphasis on diversity and the rights of cultural communities, as well as respect for human rights within each community. As University of Cape Town professor Vivian Taylor puts it, the values of competitiveness, individualism, survival of the fittest, and overconsumption are at odds with the values of social justice. These values are based on social solidarity, communitarianism, social and economic inclusion, and subsidiarity. University of Chicago professor Martha Nussbaum expands this vision of social justice to argue that humans have a collective obligation to care for each other, to provide the essential needs required for humans to have lives of dignity, and to live cooperatively with others. Moreover, excluding or marginalizing people from the process of determining the principles of social justice is itself an injustice. In alignment with African scholars, Islamic principles of justice, which emphasize altruism and helping others, also reject the Western preoccupation with individualism. According to Islamic scholars, Western theories of social justice are incomplete because they fail to identify the source of what is right and wrong. These scholars argue that Allah, who knows what is best for all humans, provides. Human beings are created for the sole purpose of worshiping the one God through the engagement of good things and avoidance from engaging in wrong things. Social justice is obtained when humans abide by Allah's words. Feminist scholars have criticized the ideas of Western thinkers, Hobbes and Locke, as relying on arguments of social convenience in men's superior strength to justify the continued subordination of women. Feminist academics have used Marxist ideas to analyze the oppression of women under capitalism, although other scholars have argued that Marxism is based on a male viewpoint that ignores the reality women experience. Feminist political philosopher Susan Moller-Oken has argued that if roles were to be taken seriously, for example, the inequities women face in society and within the family would be considered unjust. In short, male views of social justice do not necessarily represent female perspectives, and there's a diverse literature by feminist scholars. What is the purpose of government? There is no unanimity on the question of the proper purpose of government, as different individuals have proposed different answers at different times. In the mid-1600s, the political philosopher Thomas Hobbes argued that if governments didn't exist, that is, if individuals lived in the state of nature, then the lives of humans would be solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. For Hobbes, then, the principal purpose of government would be to remove the people from the state of nature and to promote their security. But how would a government arise? Hobbes' answer was that governments would be established through what is called a social contract. A business contract is an agreement between two or more parties regarding the specific rights and obligations of each party. You likely signed a contract for your phone. You agreed to provide a set amount of money to receive a specific package of phone services. A social contract, in contrast, is not an actual contract but a metaphorical one. It contains two main elements. First, the individuals involved decide to collectively give up some of the freedoms they had in the state of nature, such as the freedom to commit violence against each other. Second, they delegate the authority and power to enforce this contract to a person or assembly of people, that is, to the state. English philosopher John Locke had a more benign view of human nature. He believed that in the state of nature, humans would have complete liberty to live their life as they saw fit, without interference from others. In Locke's view, all God's children are forbidden to deprive each other of life, liberty, or life, health, liberty, or possessions. Disputes could nonetheless arise, leading to violence, which would become self-perpetuating unless there was an eternity. The state, again created through a social contract, to prevent wars from breaking out and to end them when they do. Because conflicts could arise over life, health, liberty, and possessions, the social contract would need to protect them. In the 1700s, Scottish philosopher David Hume reasoned that the primary purpose of government was to provide public goods. A public good is a resource that benefits everyone because it cannot be withheld from anyone, and it is not used up when individuals benefit from it. Streetlights, clean air, and national defense are examples of public goods. Everyone using street benefits from streets that are well lit, and the light cannot be withheld from anyone traveling down the street. Because the streetlights can be expensive, no one has a personal incentive to put them up. Unless some collective entity provides public goods, they will not produce in sufficient quantities. To provide public goods, governments impose taxes, issue threats, or provide incentives. For Hume, the social contract expanded its purpose to include the governmental provision of public goods, with governments having the power to impose and collect taxes on the public to pay for these goods. Purpose and principle. If Hobbes, Locke, and Hume are correct, one might conclude that the two most fundamental purposes of government are to protect individuals from one another and to provide public goods. Through the social contract, citizens agree to give up some of their liberties and their resources in return for protection and public goods. This raises the social contract question. How much liberty should people give up, and how much government? But presumably very little order. If there were law enforcement officers at every corner, there might be lots of order, but at the cost of highly restricted liberties. What is the right balance? There is no simple answer. This tension between liberty and order, which Hume identified in his essay on the origin of government, remains one of the most important challenges to designing governments and choosing public policies, and the major point of disagreement between those wanting freer societies and those wanting more orderly ones. One of the most eloquent statements regarding the purposes of government can be found in the preamble to the United States Constitution. We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. According to the preamble, the government's purpose is to serve the people, provide for peace and prosperity, protect liberty, and promote justice. Has the American government succeeded in providing all these things to all its citizens? Certainly it did not initially. When the Constitution was written, women and Native Americans were not protected by its provisions, and black people were considered property, without any citizenship rights. Even today, there is heated debate as to whether the U.S. government has fulfilled its fundamental purposes. It has not. Purpose and practice. Did you know that the powerful concepts embedded in the U.S. Constitution also form the preamble to the Constitution of the Confederate States of America, the enslaving states that broke away from the United States prior to the American Civil War? Just as no country completely fulfills the goals of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, there is no guarantee that the high aspirations and purposes incorporated into a nation's foundational documents will be put into practice, or even that people will agree on what these foundational documents truly say. Constitutions are not written by angels. They are written and implemented by groups of individuals who have their own self-interests and biases, as well as their own view of the common good. Regarding the U.S. Constitution, evidence suggests that the economic interests of the founders were certainly important. The framers had their own class interests to protect, but that other factors, such as their ideological beliefs, the opinions of their constituents, and their view of what was best for their state, were equally important. History is replete with evidence that the actual purposes of those serving in government align most with preserving or expanding their power, even though they may claim that they are in the public interest. Consider Turkish President Recep Erdogan, ostensibly to protect the country from perceived external and internal threats. Erdogan has extremely consolidated his power and the power of his inner circle, leading the formerly democratic country in the direction of authoritarianism. Around the world, numerous countries have used the pretense of the COVID-19 pandemic to become more authoritarian, emphasizing obedience to rulers at the expense of the rights of the citizens. Individuals are often willing to sacrifice some liberty if doing so helps protect them from real or perceived danger. And governments can take good faith steps to protect their citizens. Still, it is likely that governments expand their powers primarily for the benefit, not for the benefit of their citizens. Who should rule? If governments exist to protect their citizens and those citizens' rights, who should rule the government? The possibilities range from a single person with the sole and supreme power to all citizens, with each participating with equal importance in making decisions. In ancient Egypt, the pharaohs ruled for thousands of years under the accepted belief that they were gods. To early Greek philosophers, the rulers would be those best fit to rule, the virtuous philosopher kings. Today, those countries ruled by a single person. Countries such as North Korea, Saudi Arabia, Syria, and Turkmenistan justify this on the basis of divinity, virtue, and both. Many countries, China, Cuba, and North Vietnam, for example, are constituted on the belief that one party should rule because only that party can represent the true will of the people. The Chinese Communist Party believes that it is the sole legitimate source of political power in that country and thus should make all political decisions. The view that we the people should rule is at the heart of democratic political theory. Most countries in the world today proclaim that they are democracies, but labeling a country a democracy does not answer three main questions each country must ask about who should rule. Who comprises the we? All countries limit their we to certain groups. The United States did not grant the vote, the ability to participate in making ruling decisions, to African Americans or to women for much of its history, and even today, many states are trying to make it harder to vote. Most countries only allow citizens to vote. Some countries expand this right to non-citizens. How much power should the citizens have? In a pure direct democracy, all political decisions are made collectively by all voters. No country today practices pure democracy for both practical and philosophical reasons. Practically speaking, how do you get millions of people together to discuss and vote on every issue? Philosophically, many believe it is reasonable to ask whether voters are wise and knowledgeable enough to make all of a country's political decisions and still have time and room in their lives to do all the other things that make a society. Instead, most democratic countries are representative democracies in which voters elect individuals to represent their interests within the legislature. Is a democracy better than other forms of government? This is debatable. Former Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, Winston Churchill, is famously quoted as saying that democracy is the worst form of government except for all those other forms. Since antiquity, political philosophers and practitioners have worried that democracy will inevitably become mob rule, the citizens who, rather than make wise decisions in the public interest, seek to exploit minorities, rob the wealthy, and otherwise favor policies and leaders who are nasty and brutish, as Hobbes feared regarding the absence of government. According to some, rather than expanding the right of the people to rule, ignorant and incompetent voters, that is, most of them, should be excluded from political decision-making. Political philosophy seeks to comprehend the answers to questions concerning the nature of human rights, social justice, and the purpose of government. Political philosophy is not automatically translated into political practice. In practice, human rights, social justice, and governmental purposes are determined by real people in real situations. As a result, it is necessary to turn to the actual behavior of actual humans. 2.2. Why do humans make the political choices that they do? Learning outcomes. By the end of this section, you will be able to identify the principal forms of human decision-making, distinguish between instrumental or strategic and non-instrumental or expressive elements of human behavior, identify the two main interests people have in their political decisions. Human behavior is incredibly complex and not entirely understood, and it varies from person to person, like fingerprints. Each person is unique. No description of human behavior can possibly encompass the total behaviors of every individual. In order to describe human behavior, it is necessary to simplify. In simplifying, it is not possible to explain everything about human behavior, but it is possible to highlight its main features. Humans make decisions in two main ways. Empirical political science tries to understand two main elements of human political behavior, the directly observable and the indirectly observable. Behaviors themselves are directly observable. Understanding why individuals act as they do when they engage in political action or when they refrain from participating requires an inquiry into mental and psychological processes, which in the absence of brain scans are not directly observable. In the real world of politics, it may not be possible to say why individuals do what they do, but it is usually possible to see what they do. Humans make decisions in two main ways. What psychologist Daniel Kahneman characterizes as thinking fast and thinking slow. Thinking fast is intuitive, but thinking fast, people don't realize that they are doing it. Thinking slow takes cognitive energy, and when you solve complex math problem, when politicians craft their speeches, they think slow, and they think ad-lib parts of their speeches during delivery. They think fast. When you compare the policy proposals of different political parties in trying to decide how to vote, slow. If you reflexively vote for your party, fast. Thinking slow is more difficult than thinking fast. It requires focus and takes time and cognitive energy. Not surprisingly, humans often avoid the hard work of thinking slowly and rely heavily on snap judgments, which are especially prone to all sorts of biases and errors. What is true for human behavior is also true for political behavior, which involves a combination of snap and reflective decisions. Rationality and thinking slow. Political and other social scientists use the terms rational and irrational in specific ways that may differ from the ways you hear these terms used in conversation. In political science, rational does not simply mean reasonable, and irrational does not simply mean rash or lacking in good judgment. Instead, in political science, a rational person is self-interested and strategic. A rational person makes decisions in pursuit of self-serving goals and is calculating in their assessment of which actions are more likely to obtain those goals. The rational person is defined as one who seeks to maximize their own well-being, however they define it. Contrast, political science, an irrational person is one who is neither selfish, nor strategic, nor calculating. An irrational person is not necessarily unpredictable. On the contrary, in many ways, such a person can be predictable or irrational. Even when people know that they should take better care of their health, save more for the future, or study sooner rather than later, they tend not to do these things. Why not? Because humans often do not act in their own best interest. Consider voting decisions. One might think that a rational voter would study the candidates, compare them against each other, and then vote for the one most likely to maximize that voter's happiness. Research indicates that most voters don't act this way, instead relying on factors that enable them to make choices relatively quickly and easily. People tend to use heuristics in making decisions. A heuristic is a cognitive shortcut for making decisions, in which someone substitutes simple practical rules for more complex methods. What's the best thing to do in order off the menu? You could carefully scrutinize every option or say, oh, the daily special. That's using a heuristic. In deciding for whom to vote, individuals could examine the records of all candidates or decide, I'll vote for the candidate for my party. Humans are not always, or perhaps even generally, rational. But if you wish to understand political behavior, and especially if you want to become actively involved in politics, it is helpful to assume that the most skillful political actors tend to be rational. They make strategic decisions as discussed in Chapter 1, What is Politics and What is Political Science. Given the rules and the reality, to maximize their chances of obtaining their goals. Skillful political actors, a political actor is anyone engaging in political activity, will also know the value of exploiting the human propensity for non-cognitive decision-making. Intuitive decision-making. Thinking about something that you do, at times, you can do automatically, without thinking, but that at other times requires cognitive effort. Maybe for you, that is commuting to school or work or doing the laundry. On the first day of your commute, you were almost certainly thinking slowly, reading bus schedules or street signs, paying close attention to finding the right exits, so forth. If you have been commuting to and from the same place for a while, however, you may know what it's like to commute on autopilot, thinking fast. On the one hand, it's amazing that you accomplish the complex tasks of navigating without deep concentration. On the other, you've got this. Thinking fast simplifies the world for us, but it leaves us prone to many risks. Political actors are skilled in the psychology of persuasion, can, and often do, seek to take advantage of the human biases and prejudices associated with thinking fast to further their aims. Conspiracy theories and misinformation seem to spread faster than the truth because determining truth can require careful analysis, while succumbing to fake news requires only suspension of critical faculties. Politicians seeking your support are less likely to appeal to your head than to your heart. Humans behave in two main ways, strategic and expressive. People often do things to get things. They go in the store to buy food. They study in order not to learn or to get higher grades. In other words, they take action in order to achieve their goals. In an ideal world, people would act in ways best suited to obtaining their objectives. If their goal is to earn a high grade, they would devise an approach to studying, or perhaps something else, like cheating, that is most likely to produce the grade they want. If their goal is to win an election, they would presumably make decisions that they deem most likely to win votes. Note that actually acting strategically does not necessarily imply acting morally. Acting strategically is quite simply choosing the most effective means to achieve a specific end. Even when people try to act strategically, several factors may temper their success. In the first case, even apparently simple goals may have multiple or unclear dimensions. Say your goal is to win an election. Should you spend your time, money, and effort trying to persuade individuals to vote for you? To mobilize those already deemed to be supportive? To discourage voters likely to support your opponent? Some combination of all these? Once you clarify your goal, say to mobilize those who already support you, you have to figure out what is the best way to do this. If you send your supporters frequent text messages, you will excite them. Will you excite them or turn them off? Finally, calculations may simply be inaccurate. People might believe that certain actions will mobilize their supporters when in fact, those actions do not. Now multiply the complexities of getting any individual to vote for you to the challenges of getting millions of voters to support you. Acting strategically would be easy if there were single goals, complete information, and perfect judgment. In the real world, people often have multiple goals, highly imperfect information, and biased or otherwise inaccurate assessments. Still, the political actor with a superior strategy is likely to prevail over an opponent with a weaker strategy. All other things being equal. All other things being equal is an important phrase in political science. In the example above, the candidate with the superior strategy might not win if their opponent has superior resources or support. The phrase all other things being equal means that if two candidates have equal resources and equal support, that is, if two candidates are equal in other important ways, the one with the superior strategy is likely to win. Those in politics as a vocation have strong incentives to act strategically. When politicians run for office, they ask, what is the best way for me to get elected? And then act on their answers to that question. When interest groups consider how to get the policies they want, they try to use their resources most effectively in these efforts. Given the multiple potential actions they could take, their uncertainty regarding the effectiveness of their actions and the biases have about which activities are likely to be effective, no actor's strategies are ever perfect. Think back to the chess example in Chapter 1. You might expect both players to act strategically, understanding that they both have one single goal, their goal, to win the game. There are too many possible ways to do this, and they cannot know them all. They have imperfect information. Beyond that, there is another more strategic complication at play. The success of one player's strategies depends in large part on the strategic action of the other player. In plotting a strategy, then, each player must consider the strategy of their opponent. So it is in politics. Strategic actions do not occur in a victim. Yeah. Strategic actions do not occur in a vacuum. To successfully achieve political goals, individuals must factor in their opponent's anticipated strategic actions when devising their own. Acting strategically does not necessarily mean acting ethically. Politics is full of stories of politicians engaging in dirty tricks, employing intimidation and violence, or otherwise engaging in corrupt activities when they believe that doing so will be to their advantage. Political candidates in Bolivia, Brazil, Colombia, Ecuador, Honduras, and Mexico have all been accused of engaging in dishonest social media campaigns, and that's in South America. No country is immune, and the savvy political observer understands that political actors around the world face temptations to engage in corrupt acts, and that the quality of a political system might be judged in part by how much it does to prevent such deception. The complexity of human action goes far beyond the strategic. Sometimes people act not to get things, but to express emotions. If you have ever sung karaoke, looked up at the stars, played in the snow, or engaged in any of the countless activities that bring joy, demonstrate anger, or simply show you being you, you have engaged in expressive activities. Expressive activities are not done to accomplish anything in particular, but just because you feel like doing them. An alternate view is that all human behavior is goal-oriented, and that the goal of expressive behavior is to express emotion, as compared to strategic. As compared to strategic behavior, which has goals separate from the behavior itself. Expressive behavior sends out signals about the kinds of person you are or want others to believe you are. Humans are social beings who usually care about how they are perceived by others. Those around us may not actually know us, but they can form perceptions of us based on our expressive behaviors. Expressive behaviors are important in politics for a couple of reasons. Much behavior is predicted on how people want to appear, not just what they want to accomplish. And this is as true in politics as it is on Instagram. It is not always possible to say what strategic goals individuals hope to accomplish when they attend political rallies, but it is clear that they wish to express their identities as supporters of a candidate, a party, or a cause. What is called a person's party ID, shorthand for the political party in which that person identifies, is more closely associated with expressive choices than with strategic ones. Strategic and expressive behaviors can overlap, and at times they are difficult to distinguish. Consider, for example, why people vote. Voting might be a strategic behavior that aims to help elect a particular candidate, but voting is also a way to demonstrate to others what kind of person you are. Individuals' decisions on whether to vote or for whom to vote are also context dependent. In most democracies, voting is optional, but in Argentina, Australia, and Austria, citizens are required to vote. At times, what appears to be expressive behavior is deliberately strategic. Political candidates choose their attire to send messages about who they are, as well as why people should support them. Humans seek two different interests: self-interest and the interest of others. In simple terms, humans apply intuitive and cognitive thinking and strategic and expressive actions to seek two different types of interests: self-interests and public-spirited or altruistic interests. At a basic level, humans are selfish. This is not a moral judgment, it's an empirical statement. So stupid. People are selfish in both the narrow biological sense and in a broader social way. Although people might seek different things in life, they tend to want more, rather than less, of the things they desire. These things may be for material goods or relational ones. Man, that is so freaking short-sighted. In the political world, individuals typically prefer to support the kinds of politicians and policies that they believe will benefit them personally. The benefits can be tangible: better services, safer communities, improved schools, lower taxes, and so forth. The benefits may also be tangible as, for example, when voters favor politicians who pledge to enhance the social prestige of their supporters or to make their country more respected around the world. Candidate Donald Trump did not campaign primarily on a platform of tax cuts. He campaigned on the promise to make America great again. Chinese President Xi Jinping vows not to just make China prosperous, he pledges to make it respected. As Evo Morales, the first indigenous president of Bolivia, put it, in Bolivia, indigenous people govern completely differently. It is something historic, unprecedented, with pride. Yet many political behaviors are difficult to square with the idea that political actors are solely acting in their own personal self-interest. Those seeking government protections for endangered species are unlikely to personally benefit it if those species are saved from extinction. Those who want to prohibit flag burning are not materially better off if that policy is adopted. Some of the most intense political debates occur not over the distribution of material resources, but instead over symbolic or cultural issues. The contest is less about who gets what and more about what kind of country people want to live in. The study of in some parts of your life, you might usefully assume that self-interest dominates our decision-making. If you are ordering a slice of pizza that only you will eat, there is no need for you to consider the welfare of others when you place your order. Yes, please, put jalapenos on my pizza. When you are ordering an entire pizza to split with your friends, you might think only of yourself, or only of others. Or you might take into account some combination of your self-interest and the interest of others. Of course, it is not possible to directly observe whether individuals care only about their personal interests, the interests of others, or some combination of the two. That's BS. It is not possible to see, at least not yet, exactly what is going on exactly what is going on in anyone's mind regarding the factors that influence their behavioral choices, nor is it possible to necessarily infer from the behavior the motivations behind it. If you order jalapenos on the pizza because you believe that others might also like them, your decision might be a public-spirited one, even if the decision itself is misguided. Or you might just be thinking of your own self-interests, or both. People are pretty good at fooling themselves regarding their own motives. Did you really think your friends liked jalapenos? Or did you just tell yourself that so you could feel good about your desire to order them? Self-interest or public spirit are more likely to dominate in different areas. When you purchase most consumer items, there may be little reason for you to consider the interests of others. When you engage in communal activities, you likely put these interests ahead of your own, at least from time to time. While it is generally helpful to ask, what is the self-interested reason why that person or group might be doing that, it is unwise to assume that all political behavior is purely self-interested. When Black people join in a Black Lives Matter protest, they are saying at least in part that my life matters. When non-Black people join in a BLM Matters, it is possible but unlikely that they do so because they believe themselves to be the main beneficiaries of the protest. More likely, BLM allies or the supporters of any social movement, whether conservative or liberal, democratic or authoritarian, join because they support the cause that the movement represents and because they want to show that they are the kind of person that supports this movement. 2.3. Human behavior is partially predictable. Learning outcomes. By the end of this section, you will be able to describe human predictability, explain why human behavior can be predicted in general but not in specific cases, define motivated reasoning. Even though each person is unique, people often act in predictable ways. Given a certain set of rules and a specific set of conditions, it is possible to make pretty good guesses about how people will behave. This does not mean that all people act in exactly the same way every time, but it does mean that behavior is not entirely random. What does it mean to be predictable? Predictability means that it is possible to guess with some accuracy how some people will behave in certain situations. In the commercial world, this predictability is what allows, say, Netflix to recommend movies. In short, every time you watch a show, Netflix collects data about what you like and then recombines that data with information collected from everyone else using Netflix. If you like the same dozen films as a large number of other people, and those people have seen and liked the 13th movie, Netflix predicts that there's a pretty good chance you'll enjoy the 13th movie as well. Knowledge about human behavior makes it possible to predict how politicians, public officials, and citizens will respond in various political settings. Political scientists can use knowledge or certain characteristics, for example, an individual's age, education, and ideology, among many other attributes, to predict how likely it is that they will vote and which party they will vote for. It is possible to predict that politicians will typically seek to increase their political power because they have been observed doing so time and again. One of the central goals of empirical political science is to study how people behave politically in order to make more accurate predictions about how they are likely to behave in the future. Political analysts Show me the data, sorry. Which human behavior is predictable and which is unpredictable. The more information political scientists have about how people have behaved in the past, the better they are able to predict how people will behave in the future, but only within limits, a few of which bear mentioning. When making predictions about what people will do, the typical prediction is usually in the form of individuals with characteristics like these are likely to do a certain thing, which is quite different from saying this individual will do that. One might predict, for instance, that young environmentally motivated activists around the world are likely to affiliate with the Green Party of their country. This does not mean that it is possible to accurately predict that Greta Thunberg, perhaps the most famous environmental advocate, is a member of the Sweden's Green Party. Why is it possible to predict political behavior in general, but not necessarily in individual cases? One answer is that more and better information results in better predictions. Imperfect information leads to imperfect predictions. Just as weather forecasts can be wrong because meteorological relationships are complex and are not fully understood, behavior predictions can also be wrong. Moreover, what seems to be the sheer randomness of this human behavior should not be discounted. An event is random when it cannot be predicted. Consider this. Although it is possible to predict the outcomes of a coin flip in general, even the most powerful supercomputers cannot accurately predict the outcome of a single coin flip. Whether a single flip comes up heads or tails is random. If you predict the outcome correctly, you just got lucky. In 1962, U.S. intelligence discovered evidence that the Soviet Union was placing nuclear missiles in Cuba, only some 100 miles from American soil. Tension simmered, and at the peak of what is called the Cuban Missile Crisis, the world was on the brink of nuclear war. U.S. President John F. Kennedy and Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev had a fateful decision to make, with the fate of the world in their hands. Should each side de-escalate the conflict or pull back? No amount of data would have allowed anyone to predict with certainty what their decisions would be. They could have gone either way. Fortunately, they both chose to de-escalate, and the crisis was resolved. What explains this outcome? As the U.S. Secretary of Defense puts it, it was luck. Luck was a factor. It was just luck that Kennedy and Khrushchev finally acted before they lost control, and before East and West were involved in nuclear war and would have led to the destruction of nations. It was that close. Despite efforts to better predict political outcomes, political polling, which will be discussed further in Chapter 5, Political Participation and Public Opinion, remains fallible. Poll-based predictions about the outcomes of presidential elections in the United States were substantially off in both 2016 and, though they accurately predicted the eventual winner in 2020. Why? Because the polls ask, who are you likely to vote for? But they cannot precisely measure who will actually show up to vote and how they will actually vote. Consider an extreme example regarding the uncertainty of making predictions and the importance of making accurate ones. During times of war, military leaders have to ask, will my soldiers fight or will they run? A rational soldier might be tempted to run. What fate could be worse than likely death at the hands of the enemy? The expressive soldier might stay to demonstrate his loyalty and bravery, but it is not possible to predict with certainty which soldiers will fight and which will flee. The wise military strategist will adopt the strategies believed to increase the probability, the predictability, that the soldier will remain faithful to their side. How does the strategic political leader increase the odds that individuals will faithfully follow them? By increasing the incentives, the instrumental reasons for doing so, by raising the cost of defection and the rewards for fidelity, and by raising the importance of expressive values like solidarity, loyalty, and patriotism. It may be tempting to believe that those participating in the political causes you to support are seeking the right things or doing so for the public-spirited reasons, that they are the good ones, and that those who you see as your political opponents are purely self-interested, if not greedy or corrupt. This can be explained by motivated reasoning, the human tendency to embrace those ideas one wants to believe while rejecting evidence that challenges those beliefs. In the United States, for example, a large majority of Republicans and Democrats believe that the other party is closed-minded, and substantial proportions of both parties believe that members of the other party are lazier or less intelligent, moral, or patriotic than the general public. Individuals participating in politics for all sorts of reasons, and there's little justification for the belief that motivations of those on our side are much different from the motivations of those on their side. Each side, individuals are likely to have a mix of self-interest and public spirit. 2.4, the importance of context for political discussions. Learning outcomes. By the end of this section, you'll be able to explain why political scientists use games, describe the ultimatum game, discuss what the ultimatum game reveals about human nature, identify ways in which context matters in political decision-making. How individuals behave politically depends on a wide variety of factors. These factors, considered together, constitute the context in which the decisions take place. This decision will bring these various elements together by examining the ultimatum game. Rules. Political scientists often use games to interpret and predict human behavior. A game is a set of rules, a set of choices, and a set of decisions. The rules establish what a player is allowed to do. The choices are what the player can do at any turn. The decisions are what the player actually chooses to do. Political scientists examine both hypothetical games, seeking to understand what are the best moves given a set of rules and a specific situation, and real games in which they can observe the decisions that players actually make under various circumstances. The ultimatum game is one way to explore the various dimensions of human decision-making. The game involves two players, Player A and Player B. Player A is given a sum of money, say $10, and has to decide whether and how much of this money to offer to Player B. Player A can offer none of the money, some of it, or all of it. Player B can accept the offer or reject it. Hence, the offer is a take it or leave it ultimatum. If Player B accepts, both players keep their share of the money. If Player B rejects the offer, neither player keeps any money. As an example, if Player A offers Player B $4 and Player B accepts, Player A keeps $6 and Player B keeps $4. If Player B rejects the offer, neither player takes home anything. Scholars can use these rules and choices to make predictions about what players might do and why they might make these choices. As it turns out, this game has actually been played in a wide variety of settings, and so there is evidence of how humans actually behave. Situations. What do you think Player A and Player B are likely to do? How would you play the ultimate game? You may have a quick thinking, intuitive sense of how much you would offer if you were Player A, or if the smallest amount you would demand if you were Player B. Further slow reasoning might lead you to change your mind. Let's consider some possibilities. It is possible, but highly unlikely, that Player A would offer the entire $10 to Player B, as few players are entirely altruistic. In contrast, Player A could offer Player B nothing, but this is also unlikely because Player B would almost certainly reject that offer, leaving each player with nothing. It is most likely that Player A will offer an amount that falls somewhere between $0 and $10, but what amount? If both players were entirely rational, that is, if they were entirely strategic and self-interested, Player A would make a very small offer, maybe $1, calculating that Player B would reluctantly accept the offer. Player A might think that Player B would, of course, want a larger offer, but that Player B would accept. How much was it? 200. This small offer because getting even $1 is better than getting nothing. In a perfectly rational world, players would make and accept highly uneven offers. In a perfectly cooperative world, in contrast, players would offer and accept 50-50 splits. Experimental data demonstrates that in reality, players are not entirely self-interested. Players routinely reject offers that deviate substantially from a 50-50 split. The split need not be 50-50 for Player B to consider it fair. However, players commonly refer and accept $6, $4, or even $7 3 splits. Political scientists suggest a variety of reasons why Player B might be willing to reject unfair offers to voluntarily sacrifice any financial gain. One key explanation is that players seek not only to maximize their own selfish interests, but also to ensure basic fairness. For these players, those who violate fairness must be punished. There are other strategic reasons to make fair offers or to reject unfair ones. Player A will likely be uncertain of the minimal offer that Player B will accept, given this uncertainty. It makes sense for Player A to make offers that are pretty fair. If they play multiple times in the same roles, it would be sensible for Player B to reject an unfair offer because once an unfair offer is accepted, it is possible to predict that unfair offers will likely continue to be made. If I learn that Player B will accept $2, why would I offer B more? Offers are more likely to be fair, closer to a 50-50 split, if players already know each other and the game is played face-to-face, as compared to strangers playing the game remotely on computers. The total amount of the prize also surely matters. Player B is likely to be more willing to refuse $1 in a $10 game than to refuse $100 in a $1 million game, even though the fairness of the offers are mathematically the same. What if the rules changed so that player B got to keep their share of the pot when they reject the offer, with only player A losing their portion? This rule change would shift power to player B, and player A would almost certainly make more generous offers. The ultimatum game is a simplified illustration of interactions involving bargaining strategies, but it offers abundant lessons for politics. Whether one is looking inside parliamentary institutions, considering the relations between politicians and their constituents, or studying mass movements in many political situations, there is some resource, tangible or intangible, that one set of actors hasn't another one wants. And the players have to decide how to share that resource. The real game of politics is much more complicated. Usually there are many players, and those players may seek to change the rules while they are playing. The size and nature of the resource under negotiation may not be set in stone, and the players are not limited to making, accepting, or rejecting offers, but may also use threats and deception. The more complex a negotiation, the more difficult it is to predict how it will play out. Oh, is that it? All right. End of Political Science, Chapter 2.